one of the most puzzling and perplexing political prognostications, which is completely reliable, is that in the United States, cities vote liberal. Do you remember the red-blue election maps the network started showing in 2000? They showed red states and blue states. Blue states like California and New York voted Democratic in the last election, while red states like Texas and Oklahoma voted Republican. The problem is that this map didn't really show the real truth. You see, in order to see how the world really works, you have to drill down to the microscopic. Remember, mountains never reveal as much as molecules. So rather than seeing how states voted, we ought to take a look at how counties voted. Now, in Alaska we call them boroughs, and in Louisiana we call them parishes, but in total, counting everything, there's a little more than 3,000 counties in the United States. We can see that California and New York, which went Democratic blue, so did New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado went totally Democratic blue. But when we peer microscopically into the county map, it is easy to see that large swaths of California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado are red Republican. Even New York, which as a state voted Democratic, has many counties that are majority populated by solid conservatives. Obvious question. If such large parts of California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado are red, how come the states went blue? The answer, you know it already, it's equally obvious. The population concentration in California is in Los Angeles and San Francisco. You can see the blue stretches along the coastline there. In Nevada, population concentration is up there in the north, which is Reno, and down here in southern Nevada, Las Vegas. The cities go blue. In New Mexico, most of the counties went red, but in sheer numbers of voters, the population is heavily concentrated in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, which went Democratic. In Colorado, much of the state is conservative, but the cities voted liberal. And the problem is that most people in Colorado live in Denver and in Boulder and in Fort Collins and in Pueblo, all blue. Now here's what makes this a truly terrifying phenomenon for those of us who recognize that our country's state religion of secular liberal fundamentalism is less of a political philosophy and more of a sick and twisted pathology trying to destroy civilization. Here's the really scary fact. More and more Americans are abandoning our lovely rural neighborhood and moving into cities. Furthermore, cities are spreading and swallowing up peaceful and law-abiding rural neighborhoods and incorporating them into the cities. Take a look at the chart. In only the 10 years that separated our 2000 census from our national census 10 years later in 2010, the percentage of Americans that moved from living rurally to the cities was 2%. That's a lot of numbers. Take a look and see. 2000, 79% of Americans lived urban. 2010, pardon me. In 2010, the number had gone up to 81%. In 2000, looking at the blue, in 2000, the rural neighborhoods had 21% of our population. 10 years later, only 19%. And so the charts show very clearly that more than 5 million people, that's 2% of our population, in only 10 years moved from rural to urban. That means that more than 500,000 Americans are moving away from rural areas each year and into the cities. 500,000 people becoming city dwellers each year. Now you understand that elections turn on far fewer than that. And because cities clearly and consistently vote left, what we could be seeing is a trend of more and more secular liberal fundamentalists of voters each and every year. And if this is true, and it certainly seems to be, what hope is there for us? So the three questions we must analyze here today, America, are these. Question number one, why are cities so much more liberal than the rest of the country? You have to know it. Question number two, do cities attract citizens with socialistic leanings, or do they tend to convert people who live in them from conservative to left-leaning liberals? It's got to be one or the other, right? Question number three, can anything be done to change this? In order to solve these three riddles, we should take a closer look at what cities really are. And we need to start by debunking a bogus theory of how cities come into existence. For a long time, social scientists assumed that cities gradually grew out of farming villages, which in turn were places where the region's farmers used to get together. So no farmers, there'd be no villages, and if there are no villages, there'd be no cities that could come into existence. But strangely enough, this is precisely the reverse. Now look, we understand. Scientists are usually right over a period of time. But that's very different from saying scientists are right all the time. That isn't true. For instance, in the early 1900s, the accepted theory of what an atom is was the theory of British scientist Ernest Rutherford, who said that the atom was like a blueberry muffin, where the blueberries were protons and the rest were there. That was what he thought. But by 100 years later, the Rutherford atom concept had been thoroughly debunked. And now today, in the 21st century, we got a pretty good idea of what the atom really is. It took time and several wrong beliefs over the years. And similarly, there's another example. Till the late 20th century, only a few years ago, patients with ulcers were told to take antacids and modify their lifestyle to reduce stress. It wasn't until the 1980s that Australian clinical researcher Barry Marshall discovered that a bacteria caused peptic ulcer disease, and by the way, he got the Nobel Prize for that in 2005. So for years and years, scientists were wrong about the nature of the atom, and for years and years and years, scientists were wrong about the nature of ulcers. But eventually, they did get it right. That's what's great about science. Eventually, they do get it right. Which, of course, is not true for all fields, correct? For instance, politicians do not always eventually get it right. So yes, some social scientists will tell your children in college that cities grew out of agricultural villages, but they're wrong. It's not that rural areas make cities possible, but that the existence of a city is what makes the rural area viable. Right? It's not farms that make the city, it's cities that make the farm work. One thing I do agree with social scientists about, and pretty much everyone concurs on this, is that cities are the places where cultural development takes place. That vast and intricate framework of ideas, institutions, connections, enterprises, and people that we call civilization finds a home in the city. The city is the fuel that drives human development. This is easy to see. The most rural of countries, places say like Somalia, for instance, places with not much in the way of great cities, to say the least, well, where is their agriculture? Nowhere to be seen. They starve. However, places that are not terribly rural, places that are built up and are very urban with cities, places like Switzerland, places like Japan, and many other urbanized countries, not to mention the United States itself, well, apparently, the more urbanized the society, the more agricultural productivity it produces. This is easy to understand, right? Because for really top-rate agriculture that maximizes food output per acre, a farm is entirely dependent upon stuff that comes from the city. Machinery like combine harvesters, refrigeration equipment, fertilizer, electricity, and so much else. Places like Somalia, with only farms and not a city to be seen, are places where people regularly starve to death. Cities make the farms around them productive. But farms without cities barely survive. Is it? that somehow cities get liberal. How does that happen? Where does it come from? I mean, is it that, you remember Grapes of Wrath? The Joad family piled into their pickup truck and drove to California. So right now all around America is this scene playing out. Liberal families piling into their F1 Ford pickup truck. No. They're piling into their Prius electrical flashlights on wheels, and they are all flocking to New York and Los Angeles. Is that what's happening? Like, are the roads clogged up with liberals racing for the cities? I don't see it. And I mean, thank God here in Dallas. You know what? I love traffic jams in Dallas. You know why? Because they're always a result of construction. I love construction. It means you are preparing for more people. That's why I love Dallas. I really don't mind when the traffic runs slow. It's always because they're big machines digging up the road because they're building 3 new lanes. Bring it on. I love it. It's great. So, no, they're not driving to California, New York. So what the only other alternative is that a city expands its boundaries, and you've got this nice rural area that's a red neighborhood. Everybody's conservative. Everybody believes in the Second Amendment. Everybody believes in protecting themselves. And what happens? All of a sudden, the city arrives, and the city manages to inject stupid liberal medicine into the water, and everybody's drinking it, and then everybody becomes... Is that what happens? It's weird. And so I want to start off, first of all, with any thoughts. Does anybody have a theory, or anybody has an idea of how come cities seem to be liberal? It's weird. Yeah.
I was thinking about when you were giving Jerusalem as an example, and how the God connection is really the difference. It reminded me of an essay that I had read a while back from C.S. Lewis, where he describes and discusses that anytime a people or a person are not worshiping a being greater than themselves, that they become very hedonistic. And thus they begin to worship themselves, or the environment, I think, in this liberal mindset is an extension of worshiping yourself. You're worshiping those things. And especially where you live, up in the Northwest.
Pacific Northwest, yes.
Where I was living, Seattle. You see a great deal of that, where I think a lot of it is because of the lack of God, and because of the lack of centering the society on those things. They look for something else to center it on. And it is more than a philosophy. It is much more than that. It is their religion.
Yeah, you're right on track. You're right on track. And so I'll start off with building up on what you've said and make this observation. Where are people in closer contact with their neighbors? When you live rurally, or when you live in an apartment building in Manhattan? Would everyone agree that you know your neighbors more when you live rurally? Yes. It's a reality. If you don't believe me, by the way, all you've got to do is talk to folks who live in apartment buildings in Manhattan. They will tell you they've lived there 20 years. They don't know anybody who lives in the building. Now, you live in a rural area, and I mean, if your neighbor lives 3 miles away, you know him, right? That's how it works. So here's one of the things the city does. Paradoxically, although there's so many of us packed into a small space in a city, we have less communication with our fellow citizens. Now, when you have less communication with other citizens, automatically you replace that with more communication with institutions. And so government now becomes more of your communication center. So in ordinary healthy society, in the Abraham vision of society that the founders of America believed in, the connection between the citizens in a society is almost neural. It's like the brain network. If you would draw lines between all the people communicating with each other in a city, you'd see this wild network of lines with lights flashing all over the place. And somebody would say, like, well, where's government? Oh, who cares? There's nowhere to be seen. I mean, that's not what people are talking about. You look at the people. They're helping each other at the Boy Scouts group and at the school and at the church, and they're getting together for picnics and barbecues. Look at what's going on. But there's an unhealthy pattern of human communication which is socialistic. I call this the hub and the spoke. The hub is the government in the middle, it's the state, and everybody's chief communication is with the hub. And so one of the reasons that governments like taking care of you from the cradle to the grave is because you have to turn to them. When you get born, you got to register. When you want Social Security, you got to go. When you want your children to have an education, you got to register. When you want medicine, you got to register. Whatever it is. And so they encourage the hub and spoke. Very unhealthy, leads to liberalism. Cities, by virtue of the fact that you don't connect with your neighbors encourages you to begin to view that central hub of government as much more important. City Hall. Yeah, if you live in a rural neighborhood, I bet you don't even know where City Hall is. You live in a city, it's like the biggest, grandest building in the whole place. That is the start of the spiritual understanding of what's really going on.